Welcome, Gemma.
Thank you very much, Frank. I'm honored to be here.
The Poetry of Immigrants. That's today's show, more or less. But it's African American History Month. It's always time for celebrating poetry. And it's President's Day next Monday. So here we are in our outfits, authentically dressed, best we could. And let's see where today leads us. This is a monthly show. We're happy to offer to the audience at home some of our best love poems, thematically according to the monthly show. So I have a little poem to dedicate this series to, and I'm hoping it's a series. It's from a gentleman, John O'Donohue, who wrote what he called blessings, but they're really lyrical poems. And to start the topic, I'd like to recite for you a poem about the feelings of being an exile. For an exile, when you dream, it is always home. You are there among your own, the rhythm of their voices rising like song. Your blood would sing through any dark. Then you awake to find yourself listening to the sounds of traffic in another land. For a moment, your whole body recoils at the strange emptiness of where you are. This country is cold to your voice. It is still a place without echoes. Nothing of yours has happened here. No one knows you. The language slows you. The thick accent smothers your presence. You sound foreign to yourself. Their eyes reflect how strange you seem when seen across a cold distance that has no bridge to carry the charisma in which your friends delight at home. Though your work here is hard, it brings relief, helps your mind in returning to the small bounties of your absence. Evening is without protection. Your room waits, ready to take you back like some convict who is afraid of the life outside. That takes my breath away as I realize how many recent immigrants, refugees, and migrants have now flocked to the shoreline in Connecticut, particularly Westbrook. It's quite a surprise from 20 years ago. So this poem is for them. And also for Phyllis Wheatley, who arrived by slave ship at age 6 or 7. Phyllis Wheatley is a poet in her own right, and today we'll be sharing a few. I'm going to start off with a dedication. And this is actually a letter that George Washington wrote back to Phyllis, and it speaks for itself. Cambridge, February 28, 1776. Miss Phyllis, your favor of the 26th of October did not reach my hands till the middle of December. Time enough, you will say, to have given an answer ere this. Granted. But a variety of important occurrences continually interposing to distract the mind and withdraw the attention, I hope will apologize for the delay and plead my excuse for the seeming but not real neglect. I thank you most sincerely for your polite notice of me in the elegant lines you enclosed, and however undeserving I may be of such encomium and panegyric, the style and manner exhibit a striking proof of your poetical talents, in honor of which, and as a tribute justly due to you, I would have published the poem had I not been apprehensive that while I only meant to give the world this new instance of your genius, I might have incurred the imputation of vanity. This and nothing else determined me not to give it place in the public prints. If you should ever come to Cambridge or near headquarters, I shall be happy to see a person so favored by the muses, and to whom nature has been so liberal and beneficent in her dispensations. I am, with great respect, your obedient, humble servant, George Washington. Who knew?
What a marvelous letter.
What a humble soul to write to a slave girl in reply, and he read her work. Oh, so let's hear from Phyllis. This is the preface. Thanks, Gemma.
The following poems were written originally for the amusement of the author, as they were the products of her leisure moments. She had no intention ever to have published them, nor would they now have made their appearance but at the opportunity of many of her best and most generous friends, to whom she considers herself as under the greatest obligation. As her attempts in poetry are now sent into the world, it is hoped the critic will not severely censure their defects, and we presume they have too much merit to be cast aside as worthless and trifling effusions. As to the disadvantages she has labored under with regard to learning, nothing needs to be offered, as her master's letter which follows will sufficiently show the difficulties in this respect she had to encounter. With all their imperfections, the poems are now humbly submitted to the perusal of the public.
What strikes me is the 18th century convention of humility, your most humble, obedient servant. That is so popular in literature in the 18th century. And here it is again, and it's genuine. I detect no irony in her voice, even in the knowledge that she has made such a long journey. But I think if we hear some of her verse, some of that irony may peek out because of the situation.
Absolutely.
And the conditions.
Yes, it does.
It does. How about a poem?
Okay. On being brought from Africa to America. 'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land, taught my benighted soul to understand that there is a God, that there's a Savior too. Once I redemption neither sought nor knew. Some view our sable race with scornful eye. Their color is a diabolic dye. Remember, Christians, Negroes black as Cain may be refined and join the angelic train.
There's some of it.
Yeah, that's right.
Just the ambiguity of being a 7-year-old little girl on a slave ship and being bought right off the ship and having the opportunity of a lifetime, and the situational irony of her being allowed to learn letters, to become a professional poet, published, recognized on both sides of the Atlantic.
Right.
In a sense, in embryo, is in that poem. And yet, there's also the dripping irony of, what?
Exactly.
Exactly.
And her, as the first poem that you read said that nothing sounds right, to the immigrant, she didn't even have her name. Phyllis is the ship she came over in, and Wheatley is the name of the people who owned her. So Phyllis Wheatley must not have sounded right to her, yet she assimilated and invented so much from the world that she entered.
And at 7, to be introduced to letters and reading as a favored guest in her owner's, her master's house, allowed for all her potential to really explode. I love her poetry because as I'm hearing it and reading it, I feel the welcome of rhyme, rhythm, and convention and closed form, and really some exciting juxtapositions of imagery. But underneath the surface, there's a kind of roiling sea of emotions. And occasionally, I sense it peaks out, I'm not sure. John Wheatley did Phyllis a wonderful, wonderful deed by ironically buying her right off the ship for his ailing wife, Johanna, but somehow sensing within the first few days that she was exceptional in terms of learning. So let's explore that a little more. I'm going to read a letter from John Wheatley, which explains why Phyllis was allowed to be so special. John Wheatley, Boston, November 14th, 1772. I think for that, I'm going to put on the tricorn because he probably wore this down to Boston Harbor. Phyllis was brought from Africa to America in the year 1761, between 7 and 8 years of age, without any assistance from school education and by only what she was taught in the family. She, in 16 months' time from her arrival, attained the English language, to which she was an utter stranger before, to such a degree as to read the most difficult parts of the sacred writings, to the great astonishment of all who heard her. As to her writing, her own curiosity led her to it, and this she learned in so short a time that in the year 1765, she wrote a letter to the Reverend Mr. Ockham, the Indian minister, while in England. She has a great inclination to learn the Latin tongue and has made some progress in it. This relation is given by her master, who bought her and with whom she now lives, John Wheatley. There's a nugget of a narrative there, and it makes me wonder what the first few days of her life with the new family was like. Johanna was ailing. She was about 50 at the time, and she needed help, but she was also looking for a personal confidant and friend. They had other slaves, as they called them, servants for life, euphemistically back then. And Phyllis was somehow freed up from the daily drudgery that went along with that station in life. As Phyllis thrived, her progress was so remarkable, as you hear from the letter, that eventually, when her poetry got in the way, so to speak, of her duties, and I was reading part of the memoir which said whenever she had an inspiration, she would be allowed to leave her duties and go back to her desk and write her poems. remarkable. Then it became a question among all the movers and shakers, so to speak, of Boston. Who is this remarkable new young servant girl who can really perform and yet has kept her sense of place, as they say, her dignity and her humility and her willingness always to serve. So that when the Wheatleys went out to dinner at the local families who were merchant friends, they brought Phyllis, of course, but she was not just the entertainment that night. She was allowed to come to the main table, but she refused. She insisted on having a side table set for her so that she could keep her place. So as her poetry grew, so did the revelation of her character in her poems. How about another poem that really kind of captures part of her life story too?
Okay, in this poem, she is leaving America and she has been sent to England because at this point she has tried to have her poems published here, and there was no willingness to publish them, but the Wheatleys thought she had a chance of being published in England because they knew some people there who were willing to get her the right connections.
Exactly.
So she is leaving, and these are the thoughts she's having at the time. It's called A Farewell to America to Mrs. S.W., Susanna Wheatley. Adieu, New England's smiling meads. Adieu, the flowery plain. I leave thine opining charms, O spring, and tempt the roaring main. In vain for me the flowerets rise and boast their gaudy pride. We are here beneath the northern skies. I mourn for health denied. Celestial maid of rosy hue, oh, let me feel thy reign. I languish till thy face I view, thy vanished joys regain. Susanna mourns, nor can I bear to see the crystal shower, or mark the tender falling tear at sad departure's hour. Not unregarding can I see her soul with grief oppressed, but let no sighs, no groans for me steal from her pensive breast. So she's, I have one more, I'm sorry. In vain the feathered warblers sing, in vain the garden blooms, and on the bosom of the spring breathes out her sweet perfumes. So she's worrying about Susanna as she's leaving her.
Yes.
She feels herself not very well. She's not doing very well. And but what she's worrying about is what will happen while she's gone and upsetting her mistress, Susanna. And I was just thinking about what you said about how she was allowed some freedom to be able to go off and create, but yet she still lived within the stricture of the servant master mistress relationship, which she did till quite late in her career. But she was able to be published in England, and she met so many fascinating people there. And the Lord Mayor of London.
Exactly. And if she had been allowed to stay a little longer, because Susanna at home became very ill, and they sent for her. So she said, oh, if I could just be the new young King George III, which she would have.
Yeah, she would have.
No question. Yeah. But she actually turned around after successfully getting her poems published and dedicated to the Countess of Huntingdon.
That's who it was, yeah.
She hightailed it home, and Susanna was waiting for her and needed her. And if she had been somehow allowed to remain because of circumstances in life, who knows what an international splash she would have made, because she had honed her skills by this time, socially and culturally. And with her voracious reading, she was able to know people and their station and work it.
Navigate that complicated society, right?
And work it, she could. That's the other side of her that is so wonderful in later life. She was a very astute businesswoman. And because of the real constrictures of the time, she wasn't able to navigate the publishing world the way she would be able to today, for example. But then she knew what she wanted. It was thrilling. I'm going to summarize a little bit of that activity and give a little depth, and then we can hear another poem. She became her own best advocate. Of course, she met the luminaries in London. Benjamin Franklin was there, and of course, she was taken around by royalty and lionized. The peerage was crazy about her, but it was only a short 6 weeks. And don't forget, it was 6 weeks traveling, coming home on the ship. So it was like, how did she survive in the first place? First of all, Phyllis really suffered from asthma. Frail health. During the winter of 1773, the indications of disease had so much increased that her physician advised a sea voyage. And this is the condition under which she went. This was earnestly seconded by her friends and a son of Mr. and Mrs. Wheatley, being about to make a voyage to England to arrange a mercantile correspondence. It was settled that Phyllis should accompany him, and she accordingly embarked in the summer of the same year. She was at this time but 19 years old and was at the highest point of her short and brilliant career. It is with emotions of sorrow that we approach the strange and splendid scenes which were now about to open to her, to be succeeded by grief and desolation, and a very short life at 32. Yes, let's hear a lyrical poem and see a more rounded view of her craft.
Okay. Hymn to the Morning. Attend my lays, ye ever-honored nine. Assist my labors, and my strains refine. In smoothest numbers pour thy notes along, for bright Aurora now demands my song. Aurora, hail, and all the thousand dyes which deck thy progress through the vaulted skies. The morn awakes, and wide extends her rays, on every leaf the gentle zephyr plays. Harmonious lays the feathered race resume, dart the bright eye, and shake the painted plume. Ye shady groves, your verdant glooms display, to shield your poet from the burning day. Calliope, awake the sacred lyre, while thy fair sisters fan the pleasing fire. The bowers, the gales, the variegated skies, and all their pleasures in my bosom rise. See in the east the illustrious king of day. His rising radiance drives the shades away. But oh, I feel this fervid beam's too strong, and scarce begun concludes the abortive song. Phyllis Wheatley.
What imagery, what metaphors, what classical knowledge she's demonstrating. And what a sure and solid grasp of her craft by now. Again, the conventions of the time allow for a certain formula which ironically allows for more freedom because she can spend time with the colors and the sounds of the images. It's a beautiful poem and shows, I think, a good range. I would like to actually read a section of a book that I have condensed in John Wheatley's voice to summarize some of the ups and downs and some of the twists and turns of her short life. But suffice it to say that at the age of 32, she died from complications of her asthma, and she was pregnant at the time. She had lost an earlier child, too. So her second book, which was planned, was in manuscript form, and it was lost, unfortunately. So that's a huge tragedy, given the sample of her first book that we're reading now. And as we say, who knows if she had seen King George and gone on to become famous and produced more books and become more internationally aware, then what a star in the firmament. And yet, in a short life, we have her as first rate, who starts the whole African-American diaspora of poets, really. Marvelous.
She certainly was.
Thanks. I am John Wheatley, Bostonian merchant and tailor by trade, and I'm here to introduce to you Phyllis, our servant for life and brilliant poet. She's a godsend to us, a genius with learning and language. My wife, Susanna, purchased Phyllis at the Boston Harbor at only 7 years old. She was an anniversary gift from me. Phyllis had just arrived on the slave ship, the Phyllis, from Senegambia, a region of West Africa, in July 1761. She came alone, without family, on her long passage. At home with us, Phyllis showed very soon her remarkable genius for learning. Our 18-year-old twins, Mary and Nathaniel, began teaching her to read the Bible. Many days, Phyllis spent her afternoons studying the classics with Mary. After chores, she soon was reading Homer's Iliad, Alexander Pope's verse, and writing poems too, mainly elegies for recently deceased clergy, which appeared in local newspapers. It was great to hear the morning poem because it shows her range. She was naturally, by convention, writing mostly elegies, which was the time and the place. Why I'm telling you this? Good question from John Wheatley. Because Phyllis is a truly gifted prodigy with a stunning talent for imaginative language. She impresses our dinner guests at table, reciting verse and chapter of the Bible. Moreover, she never fails to entertain them with her advanced, deep learning of John Milton's poem, Paradise Lost. She is also unfailingly humble and respectful, always sitting at a side table, insisting on keeping her place when she accompanies us to other houses in town for dinner. When Phyllis was 19, she presented us with a substantial collection of her own poems. We decided to approach a local publisher, but many doubted that she was the sole author. No publisher could be found in the colonies, so we arranged for a literary examination by learned men of Boston, scholars, ministers, public dignitaries. A bill of attestation was drawn up and signed by these 18 men, certifying that indeed Phyllis is the only authentic, true, original author of her poems. She had simply amazed them with her natural genius for learning, her remarkable proclivity for writing elegiac verse, and her learned discourse. Still, Phyllis could not find a publisher nor gather enough advanced subscriptions to engage one.
And she was freed before her benefactress died, just a few months before.
She was. She was
So,
manumitted, as they say,
manumitted, yes.
and freed. Thanks, Gemma.
Thank you very much, Frank. I enjoyed being here.
We'll do it again.
We will, because we have so much more material, for starters.